Hi, and welcome to another episode of Live Coding with me, Shane Brinkman-Davis. And I work with GenUI and Kimmy, so I'm using time with them when we're doing fun live coding stuff. So today I wanted to do something that is a little bit shorter than my previous videos to date. I was working along improving my art build configurator library, and I needed to execute some Git commands from there. And I just wanted to do some shell commands. And it's not easy to do shell commands from Node. So I went looking for an NPM, because that's what you do. And I found this great little library called shell-exec. And it does pretty much exactly what I wanted it to do, which I can just say shell-exec. I can type in string, and it will execute it in the shell. And it's super nice. It's set up as a promise. So then the resolved value is your it's your standard input, and your catch value is actually, I thought it was going to be, as you'll see if you take a look at the source in just a minute, I thought it was going to be the resolved value is your standard input, and the rejected value would be your standard error. And it didn't quite work that way, which I guess kind of makes sense if you're doing a strict shell setup, because you can have standard error output but still have the process succeed. And I suspect that you get a rejection if the process has a failure. So anyway, that was great. I went and took a look at the source. So here it is over in GitHub. And the author here is Tian. So good job, Tian. I appreciate your work. In South America, looks what it says there. So we're over here, and all of it really is just this index.js file, because it's a good little tiny node library, and it really is just this small. That's the whole amount of source right here. I was like, okay, that's great. It's a big enough library. I'll just use it. But as I started to use it just a little bit, I quickly realized it's actually really, really simple. It's not even just this simple. It's even simpler than it looks here, but it's written in JavaScript. So the point of this live coding is I just started converting it to CaffeineScript. And what I found after a little bit is that I simplified it dramatically, same exact functionality, in CaffeineScript, which is sort of the point of CaffeineScript. So I thought this would be a good little example of how you take some well-written JavaScript, simple, clean, and show you how much simpler it becomes in CaffeineScript. Because you're looking at this, you're going, that's some really simple JavaScript. How can you make that better? Guess what? CaffeineScript is here to do that. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to go back to the top here, and we're going to grab that, and we're going to do a git clone. I need to adjust this so that you can see what I'm doing. I was messing around just a little bit earlier. Remove that old stuff. Git clone. Here we go. So I'm going to do an npm install whatever their dependencies are, where there aren't really very much. And here it comes. Loading. We all know npm sometimes takes a little while to go, but it will be done here shortly. And npm test. Yeah, I had that same problem before too. I don't know why yarn is not set up as a dependency in this repository. So I just npm install yarn. Loading. Hopefully this isn't too long. Now I can do npm test. And bam. This is always a really good way to get started if you are working with some open source library, particularly if you're like forking it and you want to work on it a little bit. You do a fork, which I'm not showing in this video, but you would fork it, and then you would do a git clone just like we did, but you do it from your fork. And then you go into it, you do an npm install, and do an npm test. And if your test passed, you're like, great, I have a ground zero, I've got a baseline, I know that it compiles, it passes the tests. And then you start editing and doing your improvements, and then you can rerun the test and make sure it keeps passing. And if it stops passing, that means you broke something, which is a great thing to know as you're contributing to open source. Because you're going to need to be able to, when you do your pull request, which is how you submit your offer to improve the library, it has to pass the tests, the basic tests. And you should have added some tests for your additional functionality. But today, I am not intending to submit this to this repository because their solution is perfectly good. I'm not going to improve it in any way other than I'm going to reduce the size of code using CaffeineScript. And there's no particular reason to submit that to them. I'm just using it as an example for us today. But I wanted to be able to have these tests running so I can verify if my code works. Unfortunately, the test harness in this app is not actually that big. So let's do it like this. There we go. It's just this short. And there's not much there. But it does fire it up and it runs it and it does exact nothing. But one thing I would like to kind of do is I'd like to add at least one test where it does a little bit more. So we're going to do this. We're going to do a pwd, which is tell me what my current directory is. And we're going to do this around, and this around, and this around. And I think what we can do here is we can say, well, first of all, it's always good to do a red-green test. And so first you create a test that's going to fail, and then you exec it. So npm test, we should have one test fail here. Because, as you can see down here, standard out, instead of returning an empty string now, it's actually returning our current working directory. And so expect dot toString match, and then we can give it a regex. And we want it to just end with shell-exec. And then we run it again. And it says that is not. Oh, toString match versus toMatch string. I'm not super familiar with this testing library, obviously, but I did a little bit of research just before this, seeing how it worked. And it's still not the right thing. So this is why this is live. We're going to show you all the warts and all. It says expect is not a function. All right, let's go take a look. So this is yarn, but I believe it actually is jest behind the scenes. That's what I found. String matching, just string matching. Oh, it's just string match. In fact, it's just string matching. Great. A little bit of Google gets us there quickly, and it can take a regex, which is what I'm doing anyway. String matching. If I had my editor set up correctly, it would be able to, I think that has TypeScript stuff that could give us like hints and to resolve this quickly. But little Google search got us there super quick. All right, look at that. It passes. Cool. So I'm just testing to see if shell-exec appears somewhere in our PWD, which is quite a reasonable expectation. So now we actually know we're executing something real and it's giving us a real result. So super cool. Now let's get into the meat of this. So here is what we have for our JavaScript right now. I'm going to make a copy of it. And you'll see why I'm doing that in a minute. And then I'm also going to make another copy, but this one is going to be index.caff. So here's a CaffeineScript file. It's not quite legal, of course, but that's okay for right now. The reason why I did this is because we're going to do this. Module to exports equals require index.caff. So we're still going to have an index.js as the entry point so that any other JS can just require this, but then it's going to require the caff file. The little magic we need to do here, though, is we also need to require register CaffeineScript as a compiler so that it can include caff files and just load them up directly. Now, if we take a quick look at this, it's going to fail because we don't have any CaffeineScript available. So it's going to go here and it's going to go, I would expect it to fail, but it's not failing. Let's see why it's not failing. Let's just see real quick. I don't think this should be legal at all. Let's just see if it's running this. I don't think it is. Console.log says, hi. Oh, I bet you it must be parsing this as JavaScript. But that's what's weird to me is because it shouldn't be. Well, you know, that's why we do this live. So let's just here, let's do, that is a comment in CaffeineScript. Use strict is automatic in CaffeineScript. All right. So require index.caff fails to run, but I don't know why CaffeineScript.register is not working here. But anyways, it's kind of weird. It might be because I have CaffeineScript installed elsewhere in my system. What I was going to do, though, is we're going to install CaffeineScript. So npm install caffeine-script, and that should get us on the right bandwagon here. All right, so I believe that's going to do what we needed to do. What we're going to do here is we just want to do console.log hi from CaffeineScript. And actually, we're just going to do and just see if this does what we want. Hi from CaffeineScript. Okay, that seems like a much better thing. And now we're going to do npm test, and it's going to fail because we don't have anything going on here. Something about jest is weird. Just say that. Jest is not. We're not going to be able to run tests with this because jest is not going to do what we need it to do. I don't even know why. I'm not going to dive into it. So we're going to just do our own little testing without the test files. And that's just the way it's going to be. That's what live coding is all about. So jest is, for some reason, not getting our correct namespacing for requiring stuff. And I don't know why. And I don't want to dive into debugging that right now. But we do know that we can run it directly. So we're just going to do it like this. We're going to say a new file, save test.caff, because we can just run a caff file directly. And we're going to go take these tests. But we're not going to do them as tests. We're just going to say... really all I care about is this. So we're just going to go... requires not a function. Right. That's because we're not actually returning a function here. Let's just return a function like that. Cannot find then. Right. Connect extraction. Log is not a function. We'll use console.log right now. Look, standard out high. Okay, so that was just a whole bunch of things, just making it past the basic test. So we're bringing in shell-exec. We'll talk a little bit more about these ampersands in a minute. But that is actually going to path up one directory and then grab the index file, which is going to be this. And then this is going to register CaffeineScript, which is not required actually in this case, but it helps. It's helpful. And then we're going to require the caff file, which is this. CaffeineScript always returns the last value in your file, so you don't have to explicitly say module.exports. And we're returning a function, so what the arrow does. It's a promise. It resolves to standard out an object with standard out and the value high. Now this actually could be a little bit streamlined like that. It's the exact same code, it's just streamlined. But now let's get into the meat of it. All right, so we're going to do this. We're going to do just the basic conversion to make it compatible with CaffeineScript. And you'll see already that we are eliminating a ton of code right off the bat. So a couple of things here. Everything is managed with indents in CaffeineScript, much like CoffeeScript or Python, where CoffeeScript got some of its inspiration. I do have to put parentheses around a single input, which is a little bit more than what JavaScript does. But that's because we can have anonymous, we can have functions with no inputs, and it just looks like a dash arrow. Equals great. These are all actually legal function starts, but what we want now is just the standard dash arrow is the smart one. It just does the right thing. That's right, this is input. I'm just going to try to leave it as close to the original JavaScript as possible right here. That's actually legal. Let's, if that, no consts, no need for child assignments there, no need for triple equals. Object definitions are automatically clean and nice. Else, that looks all groovy. This is legal. So I guess we'll leave it alone for the moment. This can be at least streamlined a little bit. And that's all legal. Legal eagle. Now let's see what it thinks about that. It says we're still not returning a function. We should be returning a function. Here, we got some lets. We got some lets. We just got some lets. Lets are not a function. And on, we've got a mismatched parenthesis thing going on here. And now we have a standard out quote, quote. Great. Now we're getting somewhere. So let's go back to our test. And we are going to exec pwd, which should look our current directory. All right, so now we're back live and we're doing real work. All right, so first of all, we're going to take out this little debug thing at the top. All right, here we go. Now is when it gets nice. All right, so that looks good. We've already reduced it somewhat. So here's our old. It's 48 lines of code, and it's a little bit busy. We've reduced it by several lines already. So let's go clean this thing up. Okay, so some weird stuff you might see here. So look, open close like this can just be an empty object, but if it's followed by anything, all that is a part of the object. We've started what's called an object block in CaffeineScript, and so it just reduces the need to match the curly brackets. Here we've got some standard out plus equals. Now our subcode's already short enough that we can do this. So this says if child.standardout is a true-ish value, then we can make a call on it. Well, guess what? This is just straight from CaffeineScript. You don't need that here at all because this does the exact same thing. It says if that's a true-ish value, then we can invoke that. Now, word strings, a word string with no spaces can be expressed with that. Strings don't need commas after them in lists. Bam, bam. This was just redundant to start with, so we're going to reduce that down. So you can do promise.reject error, but see, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say promise.resolve. It can go either way, but what I am going to do is I'm going to do this. We don't need to specify return at the return end of our function, so we can just reduce it like that. The last value from a function is the value of the function that's returned. Great. All right, so here we got some things here. We got some, these are strings without spaces, which with just a couple of little exceptions, not many, don't need, they don't need, they can just be word strings, which is, so the colon says we're starting a word string, and then it takes every character basically up to the next space. The exception there is generally those characters, those characters, those characters, those characters, those characters, those characters are a little bit special. Colons are allowed, they just can't be the very last character. These other ones you have to escape if you want to include them. So if it's win32, we're doing that. All right, let's simplify this. This is all way more than we need here. And we could just do this. just to show off a little bit more fun. So again, we're in an object block. If you invoke a function in an object block, it'll store the results in the name of that function, CWD. So that does exactly what we want. And we don't need, so this ops has a default. It's default getting set to an empty object. Well, object.assign doesn't care if we pass it nulls. So this will automatically do this exact same thing with less work. Command. If it's an array, then we join it. Let's just make this a little simpler right now. All right, so we're getting there. Let's go clean this up a little bit. There's no reason not to put this straight in the promise, so I'm just gonna move this into our promise here. And then we're not gonna have an error. So we can do this. I should verify that. I have to double check. If we throw an error in our initialization function, does it automatically do a rejection? I think it does. So everything we've done right now should all still be completely, look, totally works. Now let's do an error quick. And I think that should be a promise.rejection. Unhandled promise rejection warning. Great. And it's WTF. So in other words, if the error gets thrown from in here, it automatically becomes a promise rejection. So that was a little bit of the original author not fully understanding how to use promises. So I'm getting a little lift here just by cleaning that up. All right, so all these, he's testing to see if this exists, but it seems like this should always be true. Should we go look that up? Let's go look that up. Child process.spawn. How does that work exactly? Again, just a little Google to look things up. We're going to go here, and we need to see what it returns. It returns a child process. The child process looks like this. Child process here. Spawn. What I want to know is standard.out just like known to automatically be there. Child process. Subprocess class serve, and it always has a, yeah, it always has a standard out. So we don't need this. And what would we do if we didn't have? We wouldn't be able to capture any input and output. All right, so that's just redundant. So that's a little bit of removing random from the original. Let's simplify this some more. On error, again, this is just exactly identical. We're just converting it to a word string. Now we can simplify this a little bit and bring this all up so it fits nicely and we can see patterns. You might notice in stuff that I do that I really kind of like lining things up so you can see the patterns like that. Look, all of a sudden here, you're like, oh, look at those two completely different object types that are getting resolved here. Well, rearrange it a little bit and look, oh, they're all got standard out, standard error, and command. They just differ by one's an error and one's code. I also kind of like the error being the second clause there, just for clarity's sake. All right, things are starting to look pretty nice. I'm inclined to move most things into the promise. I mean, there shouldn't be any exceptions here, but we want it to not throw an error. We really want it to return a promise rejection. So I'm going to go ahead and just move all of this up. And in doing this, we can just pop that around the corner, and that saves us an indent across the board. All right. I'm going to change this a little bit. So command equals, if it's a command, then it's going to be command, we're going to join it. Else cmd quote dot. I'm a little bit, the default, this in JavaScript, which is the same in CaffeineScript, only assigns command if you're passing it undefined. If you happen to pass in null accidentally, then it won't do it. This takes care of null and undefined. So I think it works a little bit better. So command equals these things, and I think that works out pretty nicely. Do we have more options here? So let's look. Ops. Ops is used exactly once down here. So let's go ahead and embrace drying things up. I'm really strongly against naming variables that are only used once. It hides what you're really trying to do. It clutters your landscape. And here we go. Also, I guess you would want to have ops be able to overload it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that a word string because we can do that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap these around again because I'm going to make this a one-liner. You might also notice I kind of like one-liners. I like one-liners as long as they're reasonably short. So there we go. Responding this. Oh, what's going on here? Well, you've kind of seen it before. It is an array block. So open close bracket can just be an empty array. If I have nothing after it, it's just an empty array. If you have something after it, then it's a list, which initializes the array. So it's an array with 2 elements. Again, it avoids having to match things, which means it's really easy to move it around. I can do these, don't need the commas. I can change the order of things here really easily. I can, decide I want to put all this in an array. Like, bam, that was so fast. It makes it super easy to rearrange your code and put arrays in, take arrays out. Child. We are using the child value multiple times. How about shell? Oh, we're using shell 2 values exactly once. If nothing else, that says it's probably time to simplify. All right, so if process.platform equals win32, and I'm going to do a little something here, is win. I'm going to capture that value because we're going to need it in a minute. Then cmd else sha. And then we're going to come over here, and this is our array. And we're going to split this up just a little bit and say if is win, so we don't have to compute that again, we already computed it, then /c else -c. And bam, that all goes away. How about CMD? How many times are we using CMD? Wow, we're using it down here. We're doing close, resolve, or we're putting it CMD as part of the outputs. That's probably reasonable. That's probably reasonable. And we don't want to change the spec, right? So this is exactly the same spec that we were expecting before. In fact, actually, we probably should go ahead and update our test. We're just going to do this. Let's just do that. See what's outputting. There we go. So look, we got a shell-exec. Notice that it's got an extra new line after it, which is kind of interesting, but that's the way it is. Standard error, command, code. Now I'm going to do a little bit of shimmy-shammy here. Because CaffeineScript is installed, I have my standard lib, and I'm going to include its logger, which is much nicer than the standard logger. Mostly it knows about CaffeineScript for things here, right? So this is an object, it's an implicit object. It knows about word strings, so it can simplify that out. It's just less noisy than this. Particularly this. This is like the worst way to do it. A trailing curly bracket at the end of the line, really ugly. It's not so bad right here at this output, but if you got a long output, it's really not very pretty and hard. It gets harder to read. Plus, I think that we've got comparable highlighting. I do like having the prop labels highlighted, which is what we have here. So that's cool. Let's go back here. So now let's review a little bit what we got here. This is the original version. So it's 47 lines of code. It's pretty darn busy, but only by comparison. That's really good JavaScript. You notice I found a few little problems as we went through it that could have been cleaned up even in JavaScript. But partially converting it to CaffeineScript, exposed those errors, those opportunities for simplification. They're not obvious here in this JavaScript version, but as we started to simplify down to the CaffeineScript version, they just kind of went away. It became really obvious, like, oh, we're doing too much work here. So here we have it. Here is our code. I don't think we can make this a whole lot simpler, at least without changing the API. And I think the API is pretty good. I don't have a lot of desire to change the API. Personally, I kind of like, I would kind of like the promise resolve to just resolve standard out. I realize that's not always what you want, but if you're doing stuff that's just really routine, that's really what you want most of the time, right? You just want the standard out from whatever your process you're invoking. And if there's standard error, if it didn't fail, you just want to ignore the standard error in an automated process. What are you going to do with the standard error data? I mean, maybe you might log it, which would be an advanced option. I don't want an advanced option. This is not an advanced library. So I would totally look at actually just having it resolve just a standard out like this on success rather than this whole object structure. But I can't fault them for that. Because, you know, if you want all the information you need about the result of the process, this is what provides it to you. I just think that there's a call for the common case and making the common case as streamlined as possible and then making the exceptional case different. In this case, probably what I would do is I would have an option. I would have an option that you pass in that says verbose. And a verbose returns you everything. But without verbose, it just returns just a standard out. Or if it's an error, it returns just standard error, which most of the time, that's what you care about. I suppose you can make a strong case for wanting to know what the error code is rather than standard error itself as the default output, because that's really how you're supposed to programmatically detect what happened. By the way, I'd probably do standard out for the default output and the error code for the error output. And then unless it's, unless you had verbose set on. So those are options that we could add to this library. But again, I didn't want to change the basic structure of it. I think that is pretty much it. I think that's most of what we can do here. So that's a pretty cool cleanup. I'm going to compare their byte sizes. I don't think that's entirely fair. The old one is 962 and the new one is 600. So that's only a 1/3 savings, but I don't think that's a very realistic comparison. I think that what matters is tokens. That's always what I always say is tokens. So token is sort of the minimum atomic unit that gets matched. If you know parsing, then it is basically what the tokenizer outputs. I have some arguments like I consider that to be a token. And I've been shifting my definitions these days. I think I'm going to consider that to be a token. So even though it's a dot and then a identifier, I consider it to be a token in the sense that without the dot, it changes its meaning. The meaning of this entire identifier changes without it, and it's sort of attached to it. Really what matters is how much conceptual load is it. And I think arguably the conceptual load of this is just the same as the conceptual load of this. Like you have to know the context. Where is this coming from? Oh, it's coming from process. Oh, where is process? Process is not anywhere else in this file. That means it must be global. You have to go figure out. There's a lot of context there, even if it doesn't have the dot. In this case, the dot actually is almost less conceptual overhead because you're like, oh, it's part of process. So that's why I argue for that. I argue that this is one token. I actually argue that this is two tokens because you have to match the quotes. If you mismatch the quotes, then things break. So I consider that to be one token. I would consider that to be two tokens. And I base that all upon conceptual load. Whenever you have to do bracket matching, which you notice I almost eliminated in this file. In fact, I think I've got this and I have the parameters for our methods. So I've got these two, which are bracket matching. You have to match the parentheses for it to be legal. You have to match those two to make it legal. You have to match these two curly brackets to be legal. That is definitely two tokens. I kind of almost consider it 2.5 to 3 tokens because I consider bracket matching to be is high conceptual load, particularly if there's an error. It's not fast to debug. This, however, is just one token because they're right there together. There's no conceptual weight to it. This says start a block. It's no more complicated than if, right? It's an if block. This says start a block. There. I am trying to get some automated tool so I can just automatically count the number of tokens in these two files. But this is where I make the claim that CaffeineScript is 3x JavaScript because just looking at these files, I can kind of tell you that's what it's going to work out to be. It's going to be at least 3 times less tokens than JavaScript. Because look at all this. Even if you just count each token one at a time, this is just one token, that's one token, that's 1, 2, 3 tokens. We just eliminated all those. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, all those went away. This completely all went away, right? Because we had automatic export. This went away because that's automatically applied because you should always use strict. We just lost a huge amount of overhead tokens that were completely unnecessary. And it matters. This simplifies the whole thing pretty well. So I think that is the end of my demo here. So just to wrap up, conversion to CaffeineScript is a highly effective way to get control of your code. It reduces it by 2/3 on average. There are a few things this isn't quite doing yet. CaffeineScript is ever getting better. I'm getting asymptotically closer to 5x. It won't always be 5x, but sometimes you can get as much as a 5x improvement over JavaScript, which is enormous. Just nothing ever improves stuff by, you're excited if something improves it by 50%. I'm talking about improving it by 200 to 400%. It's a big deal. It's just JavaScript, so this just compiles to JavaScript and runs as JavaScript. It's not the most pretty JavaScript, but it's good JavaScript. It's good, solid code. And the fact that the generated code is pretty is not really relevant. It doesn't matter that much. I continue to try to improve it because it's nice to be able to look at it and see what it does. But overall, I think the legibility here is really good. And although you shouldn't really count lines of code, so we went down from 47 down to 21. So more than half our lines of code is reduced, which does matter because it's how much fits on screen. But what matters more is the number of tokens. And that's where we really, I think we'll see the big win in this particular example. So that was LiveCoding. That was a demo of CaffeineScript, which is my programming language, which I highly encourage you to check out. And I'm doing this all in association with GenUI and Imikimi. Imikimi is my company. GenUI is a great consulting company that I work with to provide great value to people developing apps. And thank you for joining my live code, and please join next time. Don't forget to subscribe and like and comment. And I would particularly like to hear about your thoughts about how important is it, the size of your code, in terms of how much screen space does it take up? What do you think? Do you think that reducing it by, we reduce the length by more than half, and we reduce the total number of tokens by almost 2/3? I think that's really important, but I'm super curious to hear your opinions on that and see what you think. All right, cheers, and I'll see you next time.